Greetings, everybody out here today on this Sunday. Sincerely hope you are well. I want to say thank you to all of our friends, comrades, family, all of our enemies. We want to say thank you because they're certainly here with us. That's what they do. And really glad that you decided to join us for this very critical topic today, the value of international solidarity. We're going to talk today about what that is, international solidarity, and why it benefits everybody to support everybody's struggles and movements for justice in the world today. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you doing that. We hope you're at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health, okay? We really hope that you are, and we are so glad that you are spending this hour with us. And we start, as we always do, by expressing our solidarity with the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we always have to define who we're talking about. We're talking about the people who define themselves as American Indian people, Chicanos, Mexicanos, Latinos. Those are the people who are indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. If you're not, if that's not you, then you're not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. And it doesn't matter how many YouTube videos you watch, that's not going to change that. We also want to pay our respects to our African ancestors, the people who are, of course, the reason that we're still here today in 2021 and beyond breathing. They're the ones who we owe everything to. We owe nothing to the capitalist system. We owe nothing to the US capitalist government or any of these capitalist governments. We owe nothing to the US mercenary military. We owe nothing to any of these entities. We owe everything that we have to the blood that was shed by the masses of our people, to our ancestors. So we pay homage to them and respect to them, and we appreciate them for making the great sacrifices that they made that allowed us to be here today, to be able to make our contribution in our glorious struggle for our Shimaranga, which means our justice, liberation, and forward progress. So thank you again for coming today and being here for this critical topic. And we do our quick introductions. This program is called Our Ancestors' Voices, Our Ancestors' Voices, and it's sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa, the home for 2 billion African people scattered and suffering in 120 countries worldwide. Our national home, whether we know it or not, whether we agree with it or not, but our national home is Africa. And we believe that our objective is Pan-Africanism. That's what we're fighting for. And Pan-Africanism defined is the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. The total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. We are convinced that until we have Pan-Africanism, we will never be able to solve the problems that we have wherever we live on the planet Earth. Our problem did not start in this country, so it cannot be solved just in this country. It cannot be solved in Canada. It cannot be solved in Guatemala or Honduras or Brazil or Jamaica. It cannot be solved in any of these entities. Even in socialist Cuba, our problem cannot by itself be solved. It will only be solved when Africa is free, united, and socialist. And we believe that that is the only way that any African in the world will be able to achieve our highest level of dignity and self-determination and make our proper contribution to the world. So that's what we're fighting for. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in the, you see on the right, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And that work is geared around heightening the ideological struggle and the practical work of every Pan-African formation on the ground in Africa. You see some of the logos of some of them there who agree that Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa should be our objective. So that is the work, the primary work of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And Our Ancestors' Voices, this program, is hosted week. This is our 90th consecutive week of programming today. And this program is hosted by myself and my daughter, Shakura, Jamu and Shakura Umi, and we are both proud organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we're glad that you're here to join us for this critical topic of the value of international solidarity. So to get us started, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings all. We hope that you are hanging in there and doing as best as you can be. Thank you so much, Daddy. I first just want to thank everyone for coming and supporting us. We thank you for allowing us your time. We know that, there are many things that capitalism has asked of you this evening or even another part of the day. Maybe it's morning time if you're listening, or maybe it's afternoon, wherever you're located. So not to make assumptions, but we know that there are other things that you can be doing, especially because capitalism is working hard to get your attention and to keep it. And so we thank you for being here at whatever time it is for you at where you are. And I do want to start off by just paying homage to one of our comrades who passed away. They been active in the party definitely all of my life and then some. So our comrade Roy Walker, just paying homage. I learned more about this comrade earlier on my admin call because as you all know, I'm a part of work study and the party. And from what I understand, Roy was very instrumental in working with Kwame Ture to establish the AAPRP here in the US. So hopefully my knowledge is not incorrect. And if it is, Daddy, please correct me when you take the floor back. But that's what I heard today from some of my other elder comrades who have also been active in the party longer than I've been alive. And so it was just very humbling to learn about their story and their sacrifices and all that they had done. And it just further speaks to why this work is important, but also why it's important to commit to your principles. Because when the party reached out to the comrade Roy's partner and said, hey, what can we do? Should we send flowers, or are you taking donations, or what does that look like? The partner responded and said, just tell people to join an organization working for justice. And I know you all think that I'm just making that up, but we're talking about a person who died, and I would never lie, period, but I certainly wouldn't lie as it relates to speaking ill of someone who has passed on, who so clearly fought and gave their life up to make the world a better place, not just for Africans, but for all people, because Comrade Roy understood the importance of today's seminar. And so, I would like to humbly think that we can dedicate today's seminar to them and their family, and just anyone else who we may or may not know of their names and all the work that they have done to try to make this world a better place. And so we thank them as our ancestors, and we thank those who are currently working. And if you are motivated by the end of this seminar to join an organization, then we thank you in advance for the work that you are about to do, because clearly you can do work on an individual level, but it's not going to have the same impact as if you're a part of an organization. And so that's the beauty of today's seminar, is we're going to talk more in detail about that. And so, I first just want to start off by reminding us that we need to remember, these terms that we grew up hearing and listening to, and these terms that we were socialized to accept and to understand. So pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, for example, right? Or this idea when the pandemic first started, and how so many people found themselves ending up shelterless or on the streets because they were not able to pay their bills, because they were not able to save up money, because the system is corrupt and makes it very difficult for a family to quote unquote survive, because they don't pay them a livable wage in the first place. And so they can't even have the money that they need to pay their bills consistently. What am I getting at? I'm getting at this idea that capitalism has repeatedly, with the help of imperialism, tried to teach each and every one of us that we not only should consider how our needs are more important than other people's needs. So we've talked about individualistic approaches and how dangerous and detrimental those are. But capitalism and imperialism have also taught us that when you are able to be individualistic, that allows you to only see yourself as the frame that needs to be highly represented or highly significant. And what I mean is, it's allowing you to center yourself, which means you are separating yourself from other people. So that's where pulling yourself up by your bootstraps comes from, because that means that you need to isolate yourself from other people. You don't have to think about how other people have sacrificed for you to have bootstraps to pull up in the first place. You don't have to think about any of that, because the whole purpose of that saying is to remind you all the work that you've done. Meanwhile, you have no idea whose shoulders you stand on, which is dangerous beyond measure, as we know. There's other statements that have been come out. So if you're approaching something and it's very intimidating, and you have to quote unquote man up, right? Or you have to quote unquote woman up or them up, right? Like this idea where you're stepping into this space because you are exhibiting bravery or courageousness or whatever that may be. But again, like, how many people behind you were there to have your back and to give you the game plan so that you could step up to that plate and be ready to take on whatever that is? You understand what I'm saying? So that, I think it's really important that we think about how we cannot separate ourselves from other people, because if we do that, then we are doing the job of capitalism. And so to do the job of capitalism, I mean, if that's what you're interested in, then do you. But I personally would not want to work for a system that obviously doesn't value me. It doesn't see me as a human being. And most importantly, if I do capitalism's work, then I am letting capitalism exploit me on a whole nother level of which capitalism has already been exploiting me. And I don't think I have any more decency and respect that I want capitalism to take from me. Okay. So I think we need to really think about, like, what are we doing when we promote isolation? Because we are promoting individualism. That was all you did that. You know what I mean? Like that can never really be the case. And I try not to use absolute terms, but there always had to be someone else or a group or a community member, somebody who contributed something. Even if it means that you had a start in the first place, there was always a step ahead, if you will. There was always an extra pair of eyes, or maybe somebody was looking out for you that remained to be anonymous. And you don't know to this day how much they did for you. And so we think about how we need to make sure that we're working with relationships that can benefit all people, because that's what international solidarity is. So I'm going to take it old school for a minute and age myself. Yes, I can age myself at the age of 34. Yes. And so I don't know if you all are cartoon fans at all, but sometimes I need to escape from capitalism. So yes, I do watch cartoons at the age of 34, but that's not why I'm airing out my laundry. I'm airing out my laundry because there was a cartoon that came out in the late 1990s, if you will, and it was called Recess. And I don't know if families are listening tonight and maybe they have older children who remember Recess like I do, or maybe there are other adults who enjoyed Recess. Why am I bringing up Recess? I'm bringing up Recess because if you had never saw the show, basically the whole premise of the show was to help you understand why children at an elementary school primarily enjoyed this idea of having physical activity for 10 minutes a day in the middle of the day, and how important it was, not just for their mental health and for their physical health, but also because that was their way to develop their own ideologies and their own value and moral structures, systems as students that had nothing to do with the adults. So they literally had, like, quote unquote, rules of the playground that all the students understood. And when one person broke that rule, they had, a hearing, and they had judicial hearings to make sure that that rule was dealt with. And so, if somebody gave someone a wedgie, for example, then they would have a hearing, because everybody knows you're not supposed to do a wedgie and things like that. So that's just one example of that. So again, why am I bringing up Recess? I'm bringing up Recess because whenever there was something that was a threat to all of the students, there were 6 group of students who always came together. They strategized and they organized a plan. And then they went around the playground recruiting more students, because they knew the more students they had on deck, the least they would be able to be stopped by the staff and the faculty and the teachers. And so there was one example where they knew that the school had more than 200 ice cream bars that had not been accounted for. And so they knew they needed to get into the cafeteria to get the ice cream bars, but the 6 of them weren't able to accomplish that mission because it was just too big for those 6 students. But when they pulled in the kindergartners, and when they pulled in the the swinger girl, and when they pulled in the King Bob of 6th grade, and when they pulled in all the 4th graders, and they pulled in all the 3rd graders and the diggers, and all these students with all these identities, everybody had a role, everybody had a task on the playground. And before you knew it, those ice creams were distributed among the entire school. Meanwhile, the staff were dumbfounded because they had no idea how they had pulled that off. And they've done numerous episodes like that. So again, like the point is, we need to understand why it really is beneficial for us as an efficient organizing front to have as many people with us working to accomplish similar goals. We would have to be out of our minds to want a limited number of people when we could have so many more people doing the work, because each of us deserves to contribute towards history of fighting for something that is greater than ourselves. And so in order to do that, we must understand that we have no choice. It's actually elitist, I would say, to assume that you do not need to develop more relationships with other people who are oppressed. It is elitist to assume that you can take care of this by yourself, or even just your group can take care of this by yourself. Because as my dad just said, one group didn't cause the oppression for that group. It took numerous power structures in place for the idea of Indigenous people to have their land stolen, or for occupied Palestine to not have Palestinians walking there. So because we know that there are greater forces out there that cause these oppressions, why wouldn't we take the same approach when it comes to resisting and deconstructing those oppressions? Next slide, please. All right. So, on that note, we have to continue to just really, really think about how the AAPRP is unapologetic about the relationships that we have clearly invested in with our comrade families, because we understand that they have very similar oppression struggles as we do. And so we think about our relationship with our Palestinian comrades. And I'm so humbled to remember growing up attending African Liberation Day after African Liberation Day. And I remembered hearing from speakers of each one of these groups that you see on this slide. So I remember hearing from speakers of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or I remember hearing from speakers of the American Indian Movement, or maybe it was another Indigenous organization. I definitely remember hearing from speakers for the Irish Socialist Republic organization, my Uncle Peter and my Aunt Mary. And then I definitely also remember hearing from speakers for the Filipino struggles. And so as a child, I was socialized into it and immersed into it. So I didn't really have the ability to be ignorant, if you will, and question my parents and say, why are these people at our event? Because first of all, they didn't raise me to have those like limited structured ways of thinking, but also I just actually would listen to what the people were saying. And they were clearly saying in their solidarity statements, which is literally why they were on the program, we as the Filipino organization, or we as the AIM, or we as the Irish Republic, we understand that our struggle is very similar to the African struggle, or we understand that the African struggle is very similar to our struggle. And so we stand here today because, of course, we didn't have a pandemic back then, so we were in person. We stand here today with you all because we are in full support of Africans getting their land back. We are in full support of Africa having a socialist running smooth system so that Africans can decide how they want their continent to operate and to function. And we hope that the Africans will stand with us and continue to support us as we work on getting our land back. You see, so it's a mutual understanding there. And when they would invite us to come and speak at their events, we would say the same exact thing. The same exact thing. And so we're talking about, relationships that have been massaged and built up and manicured and watered and, just all of these things, and have been properly cared for since before I was born, since before some of you on this call have been born, and really since Kwame Ture started the chapter of the AAPRP here in the States. We have to think about how far back we go. And so I'll just close by saying this. It's really important, once again, for us to open our minds and to understand we don't have a choice. We need to be in camaraderie and in cahoots with our Palestinian family and our Indigenous family and our Irish family and our Filipino family. We need to be in cahoots with them because their struggle is our struggle is their struggle. And if you don't want to take my word for it, you can think about our comrade Kwame Nkrumah in their book, how we were reading our Kwame Nkrumah, Africa Must Unite, in my work study circle right now. And he gives examples about how brutal it was living in Ghana with colonialism, okay? So he gives really triggered examples for me personally, where he's talking about how the British would put up segregated signs saying, you know, no African can come in this business establishment, Britain only, right? And so, of course, that made me think of Jim Crow. And it made me think of how we had our signs where we were only allowed to drink from certain water fountains. And so the point I'm making is the struggle for Africans is not one where they just experience that type of malicious treatment in Canada. The struggle for Africans is not one where they just experience that type of malicious treatment in Milwaukee. The struggle for Africans is not one where they just experience that type of malicious treatment in Accra, Ghana, or in Time, okay? Or Tima, I think it's pronounced Tima, sorry. So it's everywhere. And we've heard Malcolm say that. We've heard Sekou Touré say that. We've heard Kwame Nkrumah say that. We've heard Marcus Garvey say that. So we have to understand, family, we really don't have a choice, because everywhere people who are oppressed do not matter, which means the more people who, quote unquote, do not matter come together and start to organize, that's going to be a lot of blank people who do not matter that are going to do something about it and get access to their land back. And I bet you they're going to matter after that. I bet you they're going to matter after that, because we're going to be in control of how we do what we do, which means our people are not going to be oppressed anymore. Thank you all so much. I hope you continue to join an organization that is working for justice, and I'll talk to you soon.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Absolutely. And I think your point, going back to Comrade, the physical transition of Comrade Roy Walker, was an outstanding point. And I just want to reiterate, you know, this program is dedicated to him and his comrade partner, Grace Walker. They actually designed our first website many years ago, when the internet first came up and was running in the 90s, before, you know, we were able to really wrap our arms around this technical world that we all take for granted today. They volunteered labor and created that. And I actually never got a chance to meet Roy in person, but during that time, I talked to him quite a bit, because I was on the administration committee that you're currently on, Shakura. And so, you know, we were trying to coordinate how to gather information from the site that he created. So yes, definitely a strong warrior for justice, and a great loss to us. So honored to speak his name, as well as Sister Grace, and wish her well and let her know we're thinking about her today. So continuing on, I think we want to talk about confusion about international solidarity. There's a lot of confusion about why it's important to have international solidarity. And building on what Shakura talked about, I want to frame this in the context of, you know, specifically African people and our level of consciousness and how we see things. You know, there are three specific points that come out of the African communities about solidarity. And the first one is this belief, and it's based in the scarcity model that capitalism promotes, that, you know, there just isn't enough. And it's this belief that we are not going to have, if we spend any time and energy looking at other people's suffering, it somehow takes away from our ability to understand and do things to alleviate our own suffering. Like, that's a real belief people have, that we don't have 1 inch to give to anyone else, because we have to focus all of our attention on what's happening with us. And other communities have that scarcity belief as well. And a lot of that stems just from the ideology and practice of colonialism, capitalism and colonialism, that it isolates us and steals our resources, and we are treated like we're not even human. So we develop this level of consciousness that tells us that no one is going to look out for us, so we have to look out for ourselves. And a lot of that is valid. It's very valid because a lot of that is true. But at the same time, we have to always dig deeper. A lot of our understandings about these things are so superficial. We think that we have a really deep understanding of concepts like this, and we really don't. How would we have it? Because we don't study anything about solidarity. We don't even really know how to define the word. But yet somehow we have allowed ourselves to be convinced that we are really knowledgeable about what that is. And so therefore we think we know whether it's something that's healthy for us or not. So yeah, it is valid to feel like we have to look out for ourselves. That's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we can do that. We can look out for ourselves and understand that it takes nothing from us to be able to look at what other people are suffering. It actually adds to our ability to take care of ourselves when we reach that level of understanding. So that's the first level of confusion about international solidarity. The second point coming out of our community is that people, there's this common belief that people are, they don't, no non-African people do anything to support the African liberation struggle with African people. That's a common thing I hear African people say all the time. They don't do anything for us, so why should we be there for them? And that is just, first off, it's just absolutely not true. It's not true at all. And the only people who say that, I've never heard a single person say that who is involved in organized struggle for liberation, right? I've never heard anybody from the Nation of Islam say that. I've never heard anybody from the Malcolm X grassroots movement say that. I've never heard anybody from the Republic of New Africa say that. I've never heard any of the original Black Panther Party members say that. Nobody involved in organized struggle says that. The only people who say, well, nobody ever does anything for us, are people that aren't involved in organized struggle, because from their vantage point and how they evaluate the whole world, as Shakur said, is based on their individual perception of the world. And by perception, we mean what they think they see, because they're not participating in the struggle. So they really don't know what they're looking at, but they think they do. So they perceive that no one helps them because maybe in their individual life, they have not seen it in their individual life. And so for them, since their individual perception fuels their understanding, since they haven't seen it in their individual life, for them, it doesn't exist. And that is clearly a backward way of looking at the world. And the reason why nobody who's involved in organized struggle ever says that is because just by the organic nature of struggle, when you participate in it on an organized level, which means you're doing it consistently, you don't just do one thing or half do something, you do it consistently all the time, you organize your life around it, then you're going to naturally come in contact with people who are also engaging in principled struggle all the time. And so you're going to build relationships with those people. Every relationship we have with the communities that Shakur talked about, that's how those relationships came about. And if you are engaged in organized work, if you think about it, the relationships you have, that's how they came about. Because you were doing the work, other people were doing the work. It just makes sense that at some point you're going to connect. And then when you connect, you're going to, come to have a much better understanding of what their struggle is, as they're going to have a much better understanding of what your struggle is. So we don't have time today to go over all the things historically that the Asian liberation struggle has done for the African liberation struggle. We don't have time to do that with the indigenous people. We don't have time to do that with the Palestinian people. We don't have time to do that with the Irish people, the Filipino people, etc. But what we can tell you is that we have done plenty of these workshops on that. So, there's more than enough material here for people who dispute that to look it up and inspire you to learn more so that you can understand it better. Because there are plenty of things that all of those communities have always done for our struggle and continue to do for our struggle, no question, just like we continue to do things for their struggle. So point one, point two, not valid. Again, this individualism, and it really prohibits our ability to grow when the only perspective we have is our individual lives. We're never going to move forward if that's how we see the world. The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was 100% correct when he said one person's point of view is never going to be enough to understand what's happening in the world, because at best, we only live 70, 80 years, and the world is millions of years old. So how do we think that we're going to understand critical things about the world if all we have to rely on is our little 70, 80 years? And those 70, 80 years, for the most part, is not quality experience. It's just our anecdotal experience based on our individual subjective, things that we encounter in our lives, most of which we don't even understand properly. So not valid. The third myth, because I said there were three that I want to talk about coming out of the African community. The first one, again, was this concept that we don't have capacity to care about anyone else. The second one is this concept that no one has ever done anything for us. And then the third myth is that everybody else that's not African is racist against African people. So why should we have solidarity with their movements when their communities are racist against us? Why should we have solidarity with the Palestinian people when Arab stores in our neighborhoods treat us bad? I've heard that my entire life. And first off, I really wish, if you know somebody that thinks like that, please tell them to stop saying that to us. They say that to us like we don't know that people are racist against African people. People perpetuate white supremacy again. We knew that long before you did, okay? So that's not a mic drop to keep saying that. It really just gives me a headache to keep hearing it, because it's such a surface level analysis. This entire system of capitalism was built on exploiting Africa. We have said that a million times. We'll say it 50 million times more. So since we know that the entire basis of them maintaining their system is by pointing the finger at the African masses. Because as long as people look down on Africa, as long as people look down on African people, as long as African people look down on ourselves, we will never connect the dots and understand that we are a proud people and the key to our salvation is Africa. We will never understand that. So of course, everybody's gonna perpetuate white supremacy against African people. Of course that's the case. Richard Pryor, in his 1973 album, Is It Something I Said, gave a genius comedic presentation during that time, the Vietnam War, the US war with Vietnam was happening. And as Vietnam was moving towards victory, defeating US imperialism, then a lot of the Vietnamese who supported the South Vietnamese, the Diem brothers and the reactionary, tools of capitalism, they had to flee the country. And a lot of those people came here. A lot of those Vietnamese people that are here were reactionary Vietnamese in Vietnam. And if you're listening and that's your family, I'm talking about you and your family, because we know the history. So you won't get us with that subjective, well, my family was persecuted. We got to know what your family did. Maybe they should have been persecuted. Maybe they were doing things that were against the interests of the masses of people in Vietnam. So we can have that conversation. We're not going to fall for that. Again, that's the problem now. Everybody's interpretation of the world is driven so much by subjectivity and sentimentalism. And very little of our analysis is based on actual critical analysis and understanding of history. That's the problem right now. I was in a meeting, not to digress, but just to make this point clear, I was in a meeting with some people and we were talking about Asian and African solidarity historically. And we talked about Comrade Mao Zedong from China. And a young woman was in the room and her family is from China. And she's like, well, I'm glad he did something for you all, but my family is persecuted. We had to leave China because of that. And again, just saying that, for most of you, someone says that, you have nothing else to say because you don't know anything about China's history. But we study this. So that alone is not going to work with us. So I said, well, my parents come from Jim Crow, racist, segregated Louisiana, because she had said, we came here for freedom. So I said, so my parents come here from racist, segregated Louisiana. So We don't see this country as a bastion of freedom. But you just said your people came here for freedom. And my family's experience in this country is that it's not a free country, but you wouldn't accept that just because that was my family's experience. So don't expect me to accept your interpretation of the socialist revolution in China in 1949 because of your family's individual experience. We have to do an analysis. We have to do study, and we have to come to understand the forces of history to determine our perspective on things. Then we can come to a better understanding. So that last point about people being racist against the African masses, of course that's true. African people are among the best perpetuators of white supremacy against other African people. We know that. Any African listening to this, you know that's true. So why are what do we do here? We're so subjective and sentimental that we separate ourselves out and ignore how we mistreat each other based on how this backward system has trained us. And we only want to focus on other people who are reacting to the capitalist system the same way we do. We only want to look at them, but we don't want to look at ourselves. And that's why we don't understand what's happening, because it's a systemic problem. But even if every member of the indigenous people was racist against perpetuating white supremacy against African people, every Asian perpetuated white supremacy against African people, every Palestinian perpetuated white supremacy against African people, every Filipino perpetuated white supremacy, every Irish person perpetuated white supremacy against African people, we would still pull for their struggles for liberation, because we understand that even if they hate us, if they're victorious in their struggles, that still helps what we're trying to do, because the weaker they can make imperialism by winning their struggles, the better position it places us in to win our struggle for one unified socialist Africa. And we know that once we have that, it doesn't matter what people think about us. They're gonna have to deal with us to get oil to put in their cars. They're gonna have to deal with us to get parts to build their cars. They're gonna have to deal with us to get resources to have internet working devices. They're gonna have to deal with us to have lighting in their room. They're gonna have to deal with us to live and survive. And once they have to do that, they won't be in the position to disrespect us. They will have to see us in a totally different light, because you all know that anybody that you have to deal with to function in your life, you have to respect that people that you have to deal with. And the people you don't, that's why houseless people, nobody respects them, because nobody needs them. That's how they see it. They don't need them. They don't contribute anything to their life. So once we get in a position where people are forced to have to deal with us, that ends that problem overnight. We know that. So these myths that exist as to why we don't need to be concerned about international solidarity, all three of those myths that I just went through are all based in misconceptions about what it is we're dealing with the international capitalist system and what we need to do to defeat it. And even, I'll go even deeper to say even that is really what our problem is, because there's so many different interpretations of what our problem is. That's why the confusion is, so successful at implementing itself in our day-to-day lives. So, these lack of understandings that we have as a people, and in terms of what our struggle actually represents, we have to understand that whether we realize it or not, our struggles are interconnected with other people's struggles. That's just a fact. And I'll say a little more about that in a second, but we can't do anything to change that. We can't struggle in isolation. We're not separate in isolation. It doesn't matter what we think or what we do. It doesn't matter what we understand or what we don't understand. Our struggles are interconnected. So a smart people who are strategically planning for victory would always remember that and understand that dynamic so that we can exploit it to work in our favor. And again, I'll talk about that more in a second. But the common understanding that international consciousness is the thing that permits us to connect all of those necessary dots. If we don't know anything about what's going on in the world, then we're going to be confused about everything that's happening here. We're going to be confused about everything that's happening in our lives. If we don't understand what's going on in Africa, for example, if you don't know anything about what's going on in Africa, then you are not going to understand what's happening in your life. You're certainly not going to understand why gasoline prices are so high right now. You're not going to have any understanding about it. You're going to be one of these dummies. Well, it's Trump's fault. It's Biden's fault. Look, Trump, Biden, Obama, all of them are crooked thugs as far as I'm concerned. So don't get confused about my message. My point is that if we don't understand what's happening in the world, then we get totally derailed in terms of understanding the problems that impact our lives. I mentioned before that, someone had run into my car. It took 6 weeks. The damage wasn't even that extensive, but it took 6 weeks to do limited repairs to my car because they were waiting for parts. If you don't understand what's happening in the world, you don't understand that phenomenon. You're one of the people that's yelling at the clerical people at the body shop because you can't get your car, and you don't understand the forces of the world that are the reasons that are dictating what's going on. You don't understand anything. You don't understand the forces in the world. So international consciousness is the key to understanding the forces that impact our lives. You will never understand that if all you do is watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox or CIA or any of those crooks. You're never going to understand what's happening in your life. You're only going to understand what they teach you to understand, which is nothing. That whatever problems you have are your fault. There's something wrong with you. That's why you believe that, because all you know is what your enemy is telling you. So international consciousness is critical. So concrete example of how solidarity benefits us. So, I just mentioned that our struggles are interconnected. So let's just use Britain as an example. Just one. We could use France, Germany, Portugal, Spain. We could go on and on. But let's just use Britain, for example. So Britain colonized more of Africa than anybody else, right? Kenya, Tanzania, Azania, what you call South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ghana. They colonized all of these countries, Sierra Leone. Which means they owned and controlled the resources in those countries, and they still do. They own and control the labor in those countries, and they still do. Britain was heavily involved in the transatlantic slave trade. That is the reason why we're talking English. It's the only reason that we're talking English. They colonized this country, stole it from the indigenous people. That's why you're speaking English. What do you think the 13 colonies, what you think that was about? Right? That's because they colonized this country. And these people rose up against them colonizing this country. And even though they were stealing it from the indigenous people, they fought the British to replace the British as the colonizers of this country. So Britain, right there, I've just given you an example how Britain has devastated Africa and African people. Britain has devastated the indigenous people. Britain created the Balfour Declaration, which handed Palestine over to the Zionists. So they've devastated the Palestinian people. I mean, Britain has colonized Ireland for 1,000 years. So they've devastated the Irish people. So all of this is connected. So only a damn fool would not understand why weakening Britain helps everybody in the world. Only a fool would not understand that. And so it's not about, well, I'm supporting the Palestinians because, I don't care about the guy that owns the store on the corner disrespecting. I'm like, what kind of small-minded fool can only see it through that lens? Like, yeah, that's an issue, but he can be as prejudiced against us as he wants to be. Once his people succeed in Palestine and Britain is weakened and we succeed in Africa, then we will run his store out of business. So we're not worried about that. We're trying to we have a vision for how we're going to win. And sometimes you've all experienced it before. You've been in a situation where you had somebody you didn't necessarily like. Maybe you worked with people, you didn't necessarily get along with them, but you had a manager that you both didn't like. So what are you going to do? Just say, well, I'm just going to continue to stay here and be brutalized by this manager every day because I don't want to form any kind of pact with that person because I don't like them. I mean, that's a really stupid way to approach a problem. A much smarter way would be, hey, I know we haven't had the best history, but why don't we link up and get rid of this person? Then after we do that, you can go your separate way, I can go my separate way, but it just makes sense for us to have a united front as long as we have a united problem. That's what we're talking about when we say international solidarity. It doesn't mean you have to kiss anybody's behind. It doesn't mean anybody has to kiss your behind. It just means it makes sense for us to respect the fact that we are not the only people in the world fighting the fight that we're fighting. That's just common sense to recognize that. That's all that is. So just using Britain as one example to do that. And then just looking at examples of how solidarity has really benefited us. We talk about this a lot and we will continue to talk about it. Cuba's role in Southern Africa in the late 80s and early 90s, fighting to run racist apartheid out of potentially taking over all of Southern Africa. No one else answered that call when that was taking place. Nobody else did that. It was only the Cuban people that did that. And all of the people that are experts on the Cuban Revolution, they went over there, they sent 500,000 troops to fight for us, to fight for Africa. And of course, a lot of those troops were Africans in Cuba because they understand the connection, because they, in their schools, they educate about the transatlantic slave trade. They're not like people in this country that have never read a single paragraph about the transatlantic slave trade, but yet are experts on it. Never read a paragraph, but you can't tell them nothing about it. That they're not like that. They've actually studied it. So they went over there and did that. No one else did. The Soviet Union didn't send any troops over there. China didn't send any troops over there. It was the Cuban people that did that. And they got nothing for that. Africa had nothing to give them. They didn't get any resources from that. They didn't get anything from that. They got death and destruction, but they did it because it was the right thing to do. And if you go to Cuba, as I have, and you talk to veterans of the operation, the Carlotta operation, as they called it, in Southern Africa, as I have, they will tell you, we did it. I talked to people in Cuba who lost their limbs fighting in Africa. So don't tell me they got something out of it. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. And these people told me that they did it for international solidarity. That's why they did it, because they recognized that the forces who were fighting in Southern Africa to make Southern Africa a racist apartheid region, that would weaken the struggle against imperialism all over the world. And Cuba already understands, probably better than anybody else on earth, that anything that they can do to weaken imperialism, they need to see that as their fight. So that's why they went clear across the world to fight. Sure, there are a lot of Africans in Cuba who, have understanding their connection to Africa, but as a government, as a society, the reason why they officially made that a priority for their work is because of the reasons I just said. They recognize international imperialism halted in Southern Africa is a gain for socialist Cuba. No question there. And it's that level of consciousness that made Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, in 1971 to contact the Vietnamese government, soon to be government, the Viet Minh Front, the forces who were fighting against US imperialism in Vietnam. He contacted Le Duan, who was at that time was the Secretary General of the Vietnamese Communist Party. And Huey P. Newton told him, we'll send Black Panther Party troops to Vietnam to fight in Vietnam against the US military. That actually happened. You should look it up. So you should know, because Huey P. Newton was not confused. He understood that the US mercenary army is not our troops. They're not our troops. We support the Vietnamese. Every war that's fought against US imperialism, we support the people fighting US imperialism. Every single war. There's never gonna be a war where we gotta support the US on this one. No, hell no. Every war, because anybody fighting against US imperialism weakens US imperialism. And whenever that happens, it makes our fight for what we're trying to achieve that much stronger. So Huey P. Newton understood that. That's why he made that offer. Now, the Vietnamese people, they were humble, principled people. They were not going to accept that offer because they explained to Brother Huey P. that this would put your people in grave danger if we accepted that. And we don't want to do that. We appreciate the offer. We don't want to do that. But the point is that Huey P. Newton understood, and the Black Panther Party understood what Shakur and I are talking about, what the AAPRP is talking about as it relates to international solidarity. That's important to understand because it means that you recognize that you're not just supporting someone else's struggle. You see their struggle as your struggle because you understand their victory is your victory. So this question of xenophobia, this is the opposite of international solidarity. It's the opposite of what is going to get us what we need to be victorious. So what am I talking about? Like, for example, this idiotic and insane American descendants of slaves so-called movement, these petty bourgeoisie Negroes here that say that, well, we got to get some reparations from the government. We need the government to pay. I mean, we've done these hour sessions on this question, so we're not going to get into reparations here, but we will just say that any serious talk about reparations has to center Africa. That's where the damage was centered. It has to center building infrastructure in Africa. And anything that's not talking about that is a scam run by people who are just trying to get paid. Any talk about reparations that's centered around somebody getting a check, that's just a scam by somebody trying to get paid. That's all it is. We will never sell out our people's struggle. And if we ever get to the point where people are getting checks for reparations, I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna put a mask on and try to find it when they walk into the bank with the check. I'm gonna snatch the check and rip it up, because that is a disgrace against the dignity of our people for you to sell out our people for some money from the capitalists because you don't care anything about our true struggle for liberation and justice. So these people, this so-called American descendants of slaves, and the xenophobia they're promoting, that, well, we need to be looking at Africans born in other countries as taking opportunities from us. Again, this capitalist scarcity model, that there's not enough. There's more than enough. The problem is that we don't control our own resources. That's the problem. So anybody using any xenophobia, well, we don't need to be concerned about indigenous people because they don't like African people. We don't need to be concerned about Asians because their stores are racist. Anybody saying those things, if you think about it, that thinking does nothing to advance our struggle. Even if you agree with them and you say, yeah, I'm not going to deal with those people, how does that move us forward? You have no credible response to explain how that kind of thinking moves us forward in our movement for African liberation, because it doesn't. It does nothing but serve the interests of the white supremacist, racist, anti-immigration agenda that these Negroes working for this ADOS movement work for and are getting paid by. That's documented. That's documented. That Yvette Carnell woman is paid by these racist, white supremacist, anti-immigration people. That's documented. That's not just our opinion here. So this is a problem. If you're listening to these people and thinking, yeah, they don't have no points, all they're doing is advancing an agenda that's designed to advance them individually. They cannot even explain to you how what they're talking about is going to advance not even the masses of African people in this backward country, not to mention anywhere else. So, this lack of empathy that evolves from all this backwardness for people suffering, it's never going to be able to be explained away as any real concern for us. It's not. You're not fooling people that know better, because you cannot build your movement based on denigrating anybody else. That's not how you build a movement. The way you build a movement is by creating a clear understanding of what your fight is for. And I'm telling you, just by virtue of doing that work, you're gonna develop an appreciation for other struggles and what they're going. There's no way that that's not gonna happen. So whenever you see people, again, who don't have that, again, these are people not even involved in the struggle. So they're not developing anything except the internet bill, because that's all they do is sit on the internet and read worthless articles that aren't sourced properly and don't even know how to identify a credible source in an article or a book. Well, we're not talking about books. These people don't read no books, but these articles don't even know how to say, well, that's a credible source. Don't even know how to do that. I remember years ago, there was a sister in work study when I was in Portland trying to build the party up there. And this sister hated Europeans. She couldn't stand Europeans. There's nothing white. Anything white, she was against it. As soon as you said white, she was against it. You didn't have to say anything else. And so she brought an article. She called herself doing research because people think they know how to do research in this society. They think that just because they read something on the internet, that's research. That's really what most people think research is. That's not research, you all. That's conditioning. That's what that is. So that's what she did. She found an article about Sekou Touré, our ideologue in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And the article, like most of them written in the West, was very derogatory about Sekou Touré. And so she actually came to the meeting thinking that was an argument to question why she would be committed to an ideology that Sekou Touré helped develop, which is our ideology in the APRP. So when she got finished, while she was talking about it, I looked up the author of her article. It took me like 30 seconds. And the author was a former official in the French government. And so I showed her that. So I'm like, so I know you think you did some research, but the person who you're quoting is a European woman. You hate Europeans, but you're quoting a European woman who served in the French government. If you know anything about Guinea and Sekou Touré, nobody connected to the French government is ever going to have anything good to say about that man. That's never going to happen because he refused to bow down to them. They're never going to forgive him. They don't forgive us for that when we do that. But my point is that this sister was so misguided that she didn't even understand how to evaluate information to come up with an analysis that made sense. So, we have to develop that level of consciousness so that we can begin to have empathy. Because if you don't have empathy for other people, you'll never convince us that you have it for us either. It's just not possible. Any war strategist would see the value of international solidarity. I mean, it's just a logical approach to take in the struggle, because the stronger we all are, the stronger our blows can be against our common enemies, which is going to bring them down quicker. And there's just a strong connection, again, between the people who don't see the importance of international solidarity and the fact that they're not involved in the organized struggle. There's a strong connection there. You don't see people who are involved in the organized struggle talking like that. It's only people that aren't and think that typing on the internet is being involved in the struggle. You're typing on the internet. You're not involved in the struggle. You're not qualified to speak on it. No more than if you read an article about brain surgery, that makes you a brain surgeon. We all know that that's ridiculous. So international solidarity, international consciousness, these are key ingredients, you all, to us winning in our struggle for justice, liberation, and forward progress. So we want to invite you back next week for our Ancestors' Voices, our 91st consecutive edition. We're going to have a very interesting topic for you. Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois, the true story, the conflict between those two giants in African history. What was the basis of the conflict between those two? Why was it carried out publicly? Who benefited from that conflict? And who were the forces that perpetuated the conflict? How did they benefit? And what were the contributions of Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois? So you definitely want to join us for that. We want to encourage you to continue going to our APRP Forward Ever shop. There's the link right there. Buy you a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or some of the other items we have. Support independent, revolutionary African organization. 100% of what you pay for the articles you receive goes towards the African Revolution. That's what you should be supporting. That's what we need to support. Go to aprp-intl.org, donate there, join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. If you don't want to join the party, join some organization working for justice. That's essential, as Shakur said. It's essential. You can go to betterworld.me. All of these videos, all 90 of them are there. You can go back. So if you don't, you didn't understand what happened, how Asian organizations helped us, you can go back and look at that video, and then you don't have to suffer from that devastating disease of ignorance any longer. And hoodcommunist.org, I am one of the editorial team for that wonderful blog. Support independent revolutionary African voices. Go to hoodcommunist.org, contribute there. Come to our bi-weekly Telegram event, download Telegram on your smartphone app and participate. And we will be having a topic this Thursday. We had a wonderful session 2 weeks ago, Comrade Salifu, his trip to Cuba, talking about the Cuban Revolution. So you should come on. You're not going to hear that on anywhere else. Anybody else telling you about what's happening in Cuba? You'll never hear that on MSNBC. That's why we don't know anything about Cuba, because we sit here waiting on our enemies to tell us everything. That's never going to happen. Go listen to all of our broadcasts there at the bottom, the Pantula podcast rather, on Monday. They're approaching 50 episodes. The APRP Revolutionary African Women, Forward Ever, Comrades in New Mexico, they're pretty much where we are. If they're not a couple of episodes ahead of us, like 90 something episodes, consecutive weeks, they've done their newscasts on Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. So tune in there. Continue to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I'm working with several groups around the country, including here where I live, all over this backward country, trying to help people get organized work study groups, and get them organized for liberation. So we thank you for joining us. Come back next week, Marcus Garvey and W.B. Du Bois, The True Story. Be strong. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, everybody. We hope everybody is well. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever in any endeavor. And capitalism, you already know, it's got to go. Have a great rest of your Sunday evening.